And you're live.
We're back on House Education on May 1st, 2025. We are now looking at a proposed amendment to H248. H248 is not a bill that lives in House Education, but lives in House Human Services because it mainly deals with childcare. However, the amendment sort of crosses many different jurisdictions from the committee point of view. So which is why we're hearing about it today. Anyway, the sponsor of the bill is Representative Holcomb, and we're going to turn the floor over to you to give us some background and walk us through it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. My name is Rebecca Holcomb, and I'm here to talk about an amendment to H248, and I have introduced it also in the Human Services Committee, so you're the second committee. And I want to start up front by saying that we caught an editing error in that last committee testimony, and that has been addressed in the copy of the bill that you should now have before you. I want to start with a couple sort of contextual explanations. This bill would not have been possible several years ago. It is only even something that I can recommend today because of the extensive work that has gone on in this body to both increase funding in private providers around childcare, to add more funding to that system, and also to do significant work to try to upgrade the quality and the robustness of what is offered under the rubric of pre-K, so that increasingly people say there's not much difference between what you get in the sectors. It is also a response to the fact that when I hear from constituents, they're really worried about property taxes. And we have not done much to bring down property taxes yet, but we sure have done a lot to run it up, including in the yield bill. We're using $77 million in one-time money to buy down tax rates on budgets that have already been approved by voters. That's setting us up for a cliff next year. So I wanted to try to do something that would show that good faith intent, because this is hard work. You've seen how hard it is. You can't unwind these systems overnight because they're complicated. And we aren't starting from scratch. We're starting from what exists, and we're trying to figure out how to make it better. So this was an effort to make minimal changes so that parents didn't feel a change. They can still exercise the choices they have, but to do it in a way that brings down that crushing burden on our education property tax, in part because that burden is now actually eroding equity. We talk about equity, and I know interestingly, there were a lot of concerns about the equity that came up in the context of pre-kindergarten. Guess what? They're already in the bill. You don't like that? Have at it, go fix it. But this bill doesn't change that. What this bill simply says is instead of funding pre-kindergarten in private programs out of school budgets, we're going to fund it out of DCF. And I'll talk you through how that works. So currently, school districts, per the AOE's data, spend about $14.3 million on pre-kindergarten in private providers. Well, they also pay for programming in public schools, and they also pay tuition to public schools. So that $14.3 million is purely for the pre-kindergarten tuition vouchers that are paid to private providers. At the same time, the Act 76 child care payroll tax generated $15 million in surplus this year, and DCF has had pretty significant reversions in recent years. This amendment simply makes DCF pay for childcare in those private providers, and you can see it's pretty much a comparable number. And it means that school districts still pay for pre-kindergarten when they offer it in the context of public programs. I want to be very clear, this bill did not pass out before crossover. So it is going to go over to the Senate, and it will probably be dispensed with in the next session after there's a full study from JFO, which speaks to some of this stuff as well. But and I know how long it takes to get anything going around here. So I want to start this conversation now so that next year we already have some tools in our kit that we can use to try to protect our people, because the property tax is regressive, even with the things we've done to try to make it less regressive. And frankly, we're hearing across the state people cutting programs because they're worried about that cost. So why now? It's too expensive. We have to bring down property taxes if we're going to make it possible to bring down the cost of living. Again, some of the things that are going to continue to drive increased costs. Last year, we experienced a 14.5-cent increase in the average property tax rate. That was enough to make us feel like it was time to turn the public education system on its head. But we are going to have many of these same drivers again next year. We know that last year's increase, about 100 million of that was health-related costs in the Ed Fund. You've probably been following the news out of the Healthcare Committee they're trying to figure out how to cut $200 million right now so that we don't get a 20% increase in our health rate. We already have marketplace premiums that are 4 times the same premiums in New Hampshire. Do not kid yourself. Unless we can get ahead of that healthcare stuff, there is no end in sight to what we're going to see in terms of increases. So we're all going to have to work hard. We're going to have to work hard to figure out where we can save without hurting kids, without hurting families, and without compromising on quality. And this is just one of those places that is jumping out at us. We also know that because of the yield bill, because of these continuing escalations in healthcare costs, we're probably going to see pretty significant increases in tax rates next year. We also don't know what's going to happen on the Senate on the bill that you sent over. Thank you very much for your very hard work. Looks very different right now. In fact, I think it costs a lot more than the version that you chose to put through. And it seems to be adding back some of the, recreating some of the problems that you really did hard work to compromise and get to solutions on that could have been better. So I don't know where that's going to end. There is a pre-K study in there. It may come out if that bill goes down. We just don't know what's going to happen. So in sum, this bill does 2 things, and you'll read this. It looks like a 20-page amendment. That's just because it's a strike. Most of the language is actually their amendment. It's not 20 pages of changes. The changes in that bill tend to be a little bit repetitive, as you've discovered. If you do something for the privates, you have to do it for the private publics. So that's why it's repetitive and long. But basically what it says is if the pre-kindergarten, if the parent chooses to enroll in a school-based program, whether in their own district or another district, this district of origin will pay for it. And it describes how that happens. If the parent chooses to enroll in a private provider, they will reach out to DCF for payment for that pre-kindergarten. This does not affect, and that was the error that was caught this morning, this does not affect the ability of parents to layer payment. Mm-hmm. So some people currently use CPAP for part of their care and then use the the pre-K benefit on top. They can still do that. What the amendment also does is suggest that DCF look at whether they can streamline the application process for that, because parents currently have to apply to their school district for the pre-kindergarten subsidy, and then they have to apply to DCF to get the childcare subsidy. If it's all coming out of DCF, they only have to do one unified application. So the amendment does direct them to look at whether streamlining that application would make sense. And that's just one of the things that we could do to make it easier for these providers. Some of them are small. Some of them have to work with, I think the record for providers was 14 different school districts that I heard. And the same time, districts are working with, 30 providers, I think, in case of some of the bigger districts. That's a lot of paperwork. It's also very duplicative. If you keep it within the sector, you eliminate a lot of paperwork. So this is an efficiency measure. I don't know how to put a dollar figure on that, but I do know that if you're the business manager doing all that paperwork, it is something that you're doing that isn't improving teaching and improving learning and opportunities for kids. So that's another potential benefit from this. So in sum, if you vote yes on this amendment, you're encouraging us to go ahead and look at ways to lower the property tax. This would be about $0.01 on the average tax rate. And right now, every cent counts. Like every cent counts. And if it's duplicative, why wouldn't we do this? It also, you've heard a lot of concern about small rural schools that are really struggling to get to scale. Uniquely, we usually allow districts to decide how to operate. Here, we say, I'm sorry, even if you've lost, I'm thinking of a school in your region, won't mention any names, but if you've lost 60% of the kids over the last 30 years, you have space in your building, but you are not allowed to offer that program in-house because we currently make you not do that. What this would do is at least say you don't have to pay for all these other programs in addition to the one that you're trying to bring to scale. If you want rural schools to be vibrant hubs in their communities, you got to make it possible for them to get it to scale. And we actually prevent them from getting to scale. This won't solve that problem because it maintains the existing structure, but it does make it easier for those communities to afford those pre-kindergarten programs. It still allows parents to have a pretty seamless experience in the provider of their choice. Parents still get to choose, and there are all kinds of reasons why they might choose something different. And it still lets school districts that want to operate these programs do that as they will. Additionally, it allows programs, one of the challenges I had always struggled with it bothers me when we're blaming and holding school districts accountable for inefficiency and poor management, when we actually prevent them from managing resources effectively. This sort of puts it back on them. Do a good job, and they get to manage their programs, but they aren't forced to fund things that really aren't under their advisement and management. We want people to do well. We got to let them do well. And we can't tie their hands and then say, you didn't do it the way I wanted. So this is really putting that responsibility back on those school districts. If you vote no, you are voting for higher property taxes. You are voting to compel districts, including small districts, to not operate those community-based pre-Ks, or at least to do them less efficiently, because you'll have to dilute that investment. And you're also, a road net scale. I think I'm getting repetitive. So I'm hoping you'll consider this seriously. Does this solve all the problems? No. I went in there into Health Human Services, and immediately people focus on what they see as the inequities. Some schools do offer full day pre-kindergarten, and they really wish all kids had free full day pre-kindergarten. But we didn't pass that law. That's why you don't have it. We did not pass universal pre-K. We passed universal pre-K subsidies. So we will pay for 10 hours if you can find a place that will serve you. If this committee and the Human Services Committee want to compel school districts to provide full day pre-kindergarten, that's a choice that you have. It is not a choice that's before us right now. It is not something that any committee has discussed. It's not part of the transformation plan. So in the absence of that, while we're here, and in the absence of any effort to try to make a robust, program, we're going to have inequities. And we're going to have inequities across school districts, just as we do currently, where some people get 10 hours, some people get full day. We're not changing pre-kindergarten. We're just literally unplugging one hose, moving it over to where there appears to be a surplus. This study is going to put us in a better position so we can adjust next year if we find that there are federal cuts on something, Medicaid in schools, but not in pre-kindergarten. We'll be saying, thank goodness we did this year. And if it goes the other way and TANF is cut and we need to backfill, then we can have that conversation next year. But the point is, we're showing the people we represent that we are trying. And I don't know what I'm going to point to when I go back to my communities now. I hope you help me have something that we can point to that says we are trying. We hear you. We're committed to supporting early care and learning, because those of you who taught, and I know a lot of you have, and who taught elementary, what happens. Oh, middle. Well, you're closer than some of the high school teachers. You know what it's like when kids come to school and they're not ready to learn. Right. We need to invest in this program. This is not about not investing in this program. It is about investing in this program and working at the same time to do it in a smart way that brings down that property tax burden. So I'm happy to take any questions. I think it's pretty straightforward.
So I'm going to apologize for not having gone into it in any detail. This is only about funding. Does it get into weights at all?
Nope.
Okay.
This was deliberately, the reason it's so long is I'm deliberately not changing anything about the program. And that's why it was funny to be in the Human Services Committee, because there were a lot of concerns. They were all about the program that is. And I agree, there are problems with the program that is. That's not what this amendment is doing. That's your job. You go have at it. This is simply changing how we fund the status quo in a way that brings down property taxes. The only other programmatic change is it says, hey, DCF, if you're providing both pre-K subsidies and providing, Act 76 subsidies, why don't you do a streamlined form? Right. So parents only have to apply one. Yeah. I mean, I've heard horror stories where parents stayed in the same private provider. They thought their kid was enrolled. They happened to move homes, as sometimes people do, happen to land in a different school district. They didn't know you have to reapply, right? And all of a sudden they weren't eligible for the pre-K provider. That goes away when it's all out of DCF, because you're one unified place.
This also changes nothing about oversight or any of those things. We're just talking about money.
Everything is the same. Yeah. And it was deliberately, I'm leaving that to you to figure out money person here. All I'm doing is trying to pull out one hose and put it in someplace else.
Yeah, and so just to remind the committee, as Representative Holcomb said, our vote at H454 asked JFO to do a study on this issue to see, are there unintended consequences? What would the impact be? All that. The testimony that we'll watch from Human Services, I think, has JFO speaking to that. Great. I think that's all I had to say. Any more questions? Does everybody kind of get the concept here?
I could just make sure I clarified it. So if the pre-K program happens at the school,
Mhm,
it comes out of the ed budget.
mhm,
If it's a private provider,
mhm.
it comes out of the
DCF.
DCF budget.
Fair to say, this changes nothing.
Changes
about
nothing
public school,
else at
Publicly
all.
provided pre-K.
Right.
That just runs exactly as it always has.
Right, they
As
still
far
have
as
to go
Jeffrey's
through the
always-
pre-qualification
Everything else is the
process,
same.
same standards and expectations that are currently in statute and regulations. So it's just the money. And just to be clear, this bill missed crossover.
Right.
So this bill will come back next fall.
Yeah.
And I've never seen anything, you've been around longer than I have, but I've never seen anything go to the Senate and come back the same. So my guess is you'll see it again. That seems to be the way things work around here, or maybe we never see it.
Anybody else?
But it would be a private provider sharing space with public.
Doesn't have
So
to
you
Could
could
be.
be, I mean, that
Okay.
happens, like, we have a very diverse universe. I mean, Whiting is a great example where they had an extra school building and they said, okay, we have this building. And they found a private provider who operates in the building and the school donates the facility to make good use of an existing building. But the program itself is a private provider.
Right.
In that case, because it's not a school operated program.
Yeah.
They would get their funding from DCF.
Are there-
But
Can you share it with, though, can you have both public and private going on together at the same time in the same building?
somebody has responsibility, but many school-based programs partner with private providers for
Mhm.
extended care.
Okay.
And in that case, you would, as happens very often, I mean, I'm so grateful that both the attorneys for human services and education were able to work together because anything in this sector is subject to both two sets of federal laws, two sets of state laws, two sets of federal rules and regs, and two sets of state rules and regs. That's why everything in this space is like a big, Gordian knot that you can't untie because it's just so complicated. In that particular case, the school could be approved as a pre-qualified, as a pre-K provider, childcare provider for the extended day. So the school would be a public childcare, but for that non-education fund part, it would have to go through DCF. What tends to happen, this actually happens now. People who are in school-based programs have to apply twice, right? People in the private programs sometimes don't. It's just because of the way the dual regulation, we've always dual burden the school
Yeah.
side. So that isn't gonna change. Where there is a potential is to reduce or streamline administration on the private side.
Whiting is in fact even more complicated than.
We are not getting into Whiting.
Don't go there.
No, with Whiting.
Oh, Whiting.
Whiting at
Yeah.
the school, they is exactly as you described, except for
Yes,
pre-K is actually done by the school district.
I was gonna not go there.
It is, I know.
Cause,
But you asked if
Yeah.
it can go on in the same building and it actually,
yeah,
Yes,
it was,
it's-
they actually, it was unique because they actually pushed in, but it was very uncomfortable and I
Yeah.
don't want to advertise that model because
Yes,
for
I
a
wouldn't.
period, there were people in pre-kindergarten, but there are also kids who were there full day, but not in pre-kindergarten.
yes.
So pre-K was functioning like a pullout and I'm sorry. If
Totally
the state-
agree.
It's just not okay.
Yeah.
It's just not okay.
And it didn't need to be that way.
It didn't need to be that way, and they actually ended up working it out,
Yeah.
but it took them a while to get
Yeah.
there because of complexity. But if it's state funded pre-K, sorry, everyone should be able to access it. You shouldn't have different standards of care because you depend on CPAP. So
All right,
they
great.
worked it out. They did work it out.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Good
much.
work. You know too much. That's dangerous. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Why don't we jump right into it? We don't need to be on Zoom anymore.